especially thank Ken Ackerman for making me the luckiest guy in the room, being the guy who gets to introduce Amy Acton. And you've heard the trite saying, here's a person who needs no introduction. Well, truer words have never been spoken anywhere, with a possible exception about 50 years ago when Woody Hayes was the speaker here, the legendary football coach. But I'll take Amy over Woody, not only locally, but statewide, nationally, and internationally. I heard Amy speak recently, and she said, I'm just an ordinary person who was thrusted into an unordinary situation. Did I say that correctly? Well, she was half right. She was thrusted into a very extraordinary, terrible situation, which we hope never comes back again. But she's anything but an ordinary person. I think you all know, having witnessed her incredible talent as Governor DeWine's medical officer, her intellect, her kindness, her warmth, the empathy, and most important, what she did to calm down a period of maybe highest tension that we've ever had. And for that, she was recognized, and deservedly so, throughout the country. I get the opportunity to introduce you, Amy, and I now would like to have you look at the New York Times video. This is from an op-ed, May 2020, right as we were trying to reopen the country.
This is no small thing that we are doing together. It is so incredibly hard to have shut down our lives the way we have. I am absolutely certain you will look back and know that you helped save each other.
This is Dr. Amy Acton, Director of the Ohio Department of Health. Trademark lab coat, emphatic hand gestures, and a knack for metaphors.
It's like Swiss cheese. So I want you to picture a hurricane. When you have a fire on your stove and you have your kitchen extinguisher, you want to get it quick.
You may not have seen her press briefings, but in Ohio, they've become a daily ritual, catapulting her from unknown local official to cult icon.
Hi, my name is Amy Acton. Any questions? Dr. Amy's going to help us fight out the coronavirus.
In her youth, Dr. Acton overcame neglect and homelessness on her way to being crowned homecoming queen. And last year, she became the first woman appointed to run Ohio's health department. Under her, Ohio has become a leader in responding to COVID. It declared a state of emergency with just 3 confirmed cases. And it was the first state to shut down schools. Later that same week, some governors were still proudly eating in packed restaurants. And Dr. Acton issued a stay-at-home order affecting more than 11 million people when the death toll was still just 3. So how did Dr. Acton do it? To find out, we watched more than 7 weeks of press briefings, and we noticed themes that, well, let's just say other leaders should pay attention to. First up, she empowers us. Take a look at this clip from the day Dr. Acton issued that stay-at-home order.
I don't want you to be afraid. I am not afraid. I am determined. But I need you to do everything. I want you to think about the fact that this is our one shot in this country. All of us are going to have to sacrifice. And I know someday we'll be looking back and wondering, what was it we did in this moment?
Of her 65 words there, 12 are pronouns. Her repeated use of I tells us she's in it with us. She's taking ownership. Her use of you makes the audience feel a connection with her, even though we're watching from home. Toward the end, she switches from singular to collective pronouns, signaling that she's just like us. And we're in it together. She's in charge, yet she's made us feel like the heroes.
There are everyday heroes everywhere. We know that not all heroes wear capes. You're heroic when you stay at home. and watch your neighbor who's a nurse's child. I know you're all donning those capes in big ways and small ways. Please help us. Thank you.
Ohioans were inspired, not just to stay at home, but to spread her messages to each other. Another theme of Dr. Acton's briefings is brutal honesty. And to understand this one, we have to take you back to mid-April. People were getting restless, wondering when things would get back to normal.
So I do hope no one at home thinks like it's wide open May 1st, going back to life as normal. The rules have changed and they're not going to be quite the same. Life will be different for quite some time to come, and maybe in some ways that are permanent.
She's preparing us for the long haul, even if it's not what we want to hear.
It's really hard to hear that, but we are not going back to 6 months ago. That's not the reality we all face.
This is something she does a lot, actually, setting up bad news with a warning.
Ohioans, I know that's hard to take. I know that's a hard truth for people because we want there to be a right answer in a right way. And I know this is a deep breath we all must take.
Dr. Acton's also honest about what she doesn't know.
We have to be very clear and transparent with you. All of these numbers are a gross underestimation, and we have no real idea of the prevalence of this infection yet.
A lot of leaders just avoid talking about uncertainty, but when Dr. Acton repeatedly says,
"We don't know,"
it's actually calming to hear her admit what we all feel deep down, that we just don't have the full story. And finally, Dr. Acton sees vulnerability as a strength. After watching dozens of hours of briefings, there was one word we kept hearing over and over.
Please just acknowledge and give a name to what you're going through. Acknowledge it with each other. And so I just want to acknowledge that these are still really tough times. This is wearing on all of us, and I just want to acknowledge that. I just want to acknowledge that all of us are feeling this. It's such an unprecedented time.
Hearing Dr. Acton acknowledge our harder emotions forces us to face them head on. Stuffing down fear and sadness just causes more stress and may make us act more selfishly instead of empathizing with each other.
You'll have days when you're anxious, but don't kill yourself over that. Please know and forgive yourself and try again.
And take a look at what she does here.
Every day I go through stages of grief. I go through, denial. I go through a little anger. I go through a little bargaining. I don't have to wear this. I might not need it. This isn't true. I get a little down.
When she tells us she's struggling too, we feel seen and heard and less alone. And maybe that's all any of us want right now. In a pandemic, the words our leaders choose can save lives. As of the end of April, Ohio had recorded fewer than 1,000 COVID deaths. By comparison, neighboring Michigan suffered more than 3,000, even though Ohio has a bigger population and had its first case 3 weeks earlier. Of course, other factors help explain this. But Dr. Acton convinced millions of Ohioans to stay at home, not by ordering them, but by inspiring them.
People at home, you are moving mountains. You are saving lives. Again, I get emotional talking about this because this is no small thing that we are doing together. It is so incredibly hard to have shut down our lives the way we have. I am absolutely certain you will look back and know that you helped save each other in this state. The impact is profound. Please at home, don't stop. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for going with me on that little bit of a journey. This was May of 2020. And there's something about seeing it. I still get a little funny feeling watching it myself. Hopefully we don't take our very being here with one another the way we are for granted. It's so easy to do that, isn't it? So I want to take you back today through some of the lessons I've learned, a few behind-the-scenes stories of what was going on at the time, and my hope for the future. Please know, first of all, that I was the tip of the iceberg. Behind me was a department of thousands of employees. We had the whole of government, You saw me often with General Harris and the National Guard. We had every industry in Ohio rowing together, all the hospitals, all the nursing homes, all the prisons, all the schools. And that's back to that very original story I'll tell you about. Because I think I said, Bob, I was an ordinary person in an extraordinary moment. I actually didn't know the governor at all. I was working at the Columbus Foundation, very happy, the job I hope to stay in for the rest of my career. Some people know me from that time, working on youth homelessness, and met someone for 1 hour who represented the Attorney General. This was a board where John Wolfe and Betty Montgomery had done a healthcare conversion, Central Benefits Foundation, and so the Attorney General was always represented. Then she disappeared, so she was at one meeting. But it turned out it was the campaign. And then in February of 19, I got a call out of the blue, would I come meet with the governor? And I was so nervous, excited and nervous. I didn't think about a job. I just thought they knew I had a career in child advocacy, pediatrics, and preventive medicine. And I would try to say everything I could possibly say to advocate for things I care about. Walked into a room, and his leadership team stood up. He walked in. He sat down like you are now, and he pulled out a brown paper bag, all crumpled up, and started to eat lunch. And there's something so disarming about him. And the only question he asked was, tell me about your childhood. Where'd you grow up? And so I did. I told more than I used to tell. I grew up in Youngstown. I did have a very rough childhood, got removed at the age of 12. Really went a mile away from moving all over and having a very chaotic childhood to being in one school for 7 years, and it changed my trajectory. Kids just as nice, just as kind, just as smart. Through circumstances they don't get to pick of their birth, ended up on very different trajectories. So I really learned early about how our zip code matters more often than our genetic code and how our lives fare. So I told him all this, got so excited at one point I grabbed him by the arm because I'm a doctor and I grab people by the arm to tell them something important with those emphatic hand gestures. I know he's laughing because he knows me. And everyone froze in the room. And I literally reprimanded myself out loud. I said, oh my God, don't touch the governor. I scurried away at the top of my 30th floor, and I just thought, oh my gosh, they would never want me or put me on TV. And so it was just sort of foreshadowing. A half hour later, I got a text. He wanted to talk again, and that began what was a fabulous year, really, for public health. It turned out that the governor had done a lot of charity work in Haiti with one of my heroes in global public health, Dr. Paul Farmer, and Partners in Health. When his daughter died in a car accident at the age of 21, hydroplane, coming home from work at the Xenia Gazette. He was a senator. He and Fran put all their passion and their grief into building schools in one of the hardest places in the world. So he actually had this idea that Ohio having the worst health outcomes wasn't acceptable, and talked to Paul Farmer. And so we started off the year with one of the biggest budgets, even in a legislature that we now know is very not always easy to work with. Every legislator, if I met with them one-on-one, they hate the word public health, but they loved home visiting programs and getting rid of lead in pipes. And I could just always find something they cared about. In late December of 19, I heard an epidemiologist from the World Health Organization. I was on my way back from California visiting two of my sons, and she was talking about the strange virus in China, and there's just a quiver in her voice. And I often say, I think growing up the way I did, I'm very hyper-vigilant. It doesn't work for you in certain things. There are the hardships you always carry your whole life, but there are other ways it becomes a strength, and I pay attention to things that a lot of other people often miss. And I got back to my team. I was coming through the airport. I saw all the colleges were coming back, holding up signs for OU, Ohio State, and tons of students were coming from Asia who, come to school here in Ohio. And I thought to myself, wow, that's interesting. You know, we're so global. It turns out Wuhan is our sister state, and that the lieutenant governor had a contingent from Wuhan in January of 2020 visiting about business. So when you start to think about the context clues and the sort of diagnostic puzzle going on, by mid-January, I watched Secretary Azar on the news, and I remember standing up from our board table going, I just don't think they've got this. I taught global public health, and I Googled the word pandemic because I couldn't understand why the World Health Organization was not yet calling it, as I was watching the Diamond Princess and all these things spread, ultimately Italy and on. So I talked our governor into doing a tabletop exercise with all of government. In early February, Ohio started getting ready. And again, thank goodness he listened, he understood. I was in the White House the last week of February. The stock market crashed for the second time. I happened to represent my position for the whole Midwest. Every virology, epidemiology guru that had worked, one man who has worked in bioterrorism for multiple presidents, was shaking in his shoes. They were still not saying it on the news, but just the body language in the room. And Mick Mulvaney was sitting there. And I said, when it got to me, everything epidemiologic had been said, and I just said to Mick Mulvaney, this is the higher angels moment. Please tell the president he's got to talk to the people as if he was FDR. This is the Winston Churchill moment. And that's the odd thing about this virus. I used to teach in my global health class, if only aliens invaded from another planet, we'd finally figure out we're all on the same team. And that's what this virus was. It was a common enemy. It was a war. I told Ron Klain at one point, Biden's chief of staff, you don't get to pick no war as Delta was coming back. You get to pick, maybe, does it look like Vietnam? Does it look like World War II? But we're at war. You don't get to not do it. And unfortunately, this virus is an invisible enemy. If it was Ghostbusters and we could throw some green dye and see little blobs floating around, we'd all be like, yeah. And not, but it was, asymptomatic spread, meaning that, it's not like MERS. MERS killed everyone so quickly that it couldn't go from person to person. So it truly was our worst enemy. I got on an airplane after saying that. Mick Mulvaney went like this. He was gone 2 weeks later. Got on a plane, met the governor at Metro Health in Cleveland, and we toured the Ebola unit, the highly infectious disease unit there, and we came out for this first press conference, and we made this promise. We said that we would tell you what we knew as we knew it. And we made 2 o'clock a time because it turns out the press was asking so many questions. If we just got them every day at 2 o'clock, they could get to press by 5 p.m. Ohio News Network, I said to myself, thank God, no one's ever going to watch this. And on the way home from that trip, we started making the Arnold Classic decision. And we ended up at the top of Rafe with the mayor, $50 million to the economy here in Columbus, no small decision. Mass gathering events being the biggest thing that could possibly go wrong. We had watched 2 people go into Biogen in Boston, and 70 ambulances ultimately showed up at the hotels there. So it was a peak of the decision making. Arnold Schwarzenegger on the phone, that voice. Literally in a press conference, the governor raised a phone, you could hear him, but he was a governor and he understood. And we were able to downsize the Arnold just enough to keep it going, but it was 80 countries, 250,000 spectators. Those decisions you made in the beginning were like a baseball bat. Just the slightest change in angle here makes the ball go so far different. And when they show those numbers in Ohio, there's now data that shows by taking early action, those first few weeks we used to talk about from other pandemics, that gives you time to get the virus in control and manage the situation. It turns out that the first pandemic playbook was written by George W. Bush right after 9/11, and we have just gone through another 9/11 feeling. And I've been thinking a lot, your poem made me think again, about the people who rushed toward the building. And after 9/11, there was not a stranger on the street. There were like 4 days I wandered around Columbus, and there was no strangers in the world. And you realize that those are the moments that are also a crisis, but an opportunity. And I think that's how the governor was able to see this. What happened, we actually had in Ohio that feeling of togetherness for much more than 4 days. It lasted almost 6 weeks, to be honest. There was protest, there was discord. But that's the moment we were in. And the reason George W. Bush made that first playbook was when he created Homeland Security, they recognized that the gravest security risk to this country, not all the death and despair, all the disability we are facing, all the loss of business, everything, the security risk is a pandemic or a biologic weapon. It unmoors everything as we see it completely unmoored our supply chains. We did not have amoxicillin. We had Hunger Games amongst hospitals for masks. We would have a boat coming into port and another country would outbid us. It would turn around and go in another direction. It was wild. What this pandemic did was it actually unmasked how fragile things are, our systems, how interdependent we are, and it just revealed things. So very early in that pandemic, it was March, and I got a call from Homage owner, Brian Vessler. And his idea was to make a t-shirt. He goes, "You are trending." And trending was lost on me because my kids make fun of me. I do the remote control like a lightsaber. I have never once tweeted in my life. However, I had 55,000 followers. So these were not things I was paying attention to. I was talking to Mike. I was trying to figure out where we could get more embalming fluid. I was trying to help set up field hospitals. But it turned out some energy was spreading. And he said, "I'm going to make a Dr. Amy t-shirt and raise money for youth homelessness," which is something he knew I cared a lot about and something I had experienced in my life. But I said to him that day, "You are going to know me for about 2 weeks, but before this pandemic is over, you are going to meet so many heroes. It is going to be me, then it's going to be the ambulance driver and the person running the prison and the school superintendent and the business owner and on and on and on." And that is exactly what happened. And that spirit started sort of a meme of we're in this all together in Ohio. And I can tell you to this day, orders, all those orders I did, no order can control the amount of new decision-making and leadership that had to happen everywhere. All we did was give you the best information we could every day, but then everybody from wherever they sat, as a parent, every single person had to start solving things from where they sat. They all had to start rowing. And the image I had in my mind, I remember, was of a life raft. Like I was thinking about the Titanic, and if we could just get every Ohioan looking at the couple people around them, at the person living in your neighborhood, the elderly person who didn't have relatives, whatever you could do, and if we each just pulled one another up on that life raft as best we could, what I realized was if we could just get enough of us to do that, not everyone, it's never perfect, but if enough of us did it, most of the time all of us would get through. And that's actually what I saw spread in Ohio. That's actually what happened. We did, it turns out, flatten the curve. The numbers I came up with, we didn't even have data systems that could track numbers like that, and our state has been so underfunded. But we got the best scientists from places like the Cleveland Clinic and all over the country once the governors started helping one another. And I put scientists in a room, I called them the force, and they started running numbers. These folks aren't going to work at ODH, they work in big business. But they sat together and they figured out those curves you saw. The sad part of it is, when we flatten the curve, and what I told the legislature the first time I ever testified, when I knock it out of the park and do everything right, you don't see it. You don't see what I prevent. You don't see the silent victories of public health. It's one of the biggest problems we face. So much affects our well-being that is not in our individual control, that we can only solve collectively, from having traffic lights to airplanes fly right in the air to things like infectious diseases. we got clean water and safe food. That's why we live such longer, healthier lives. It takes all of us and whole systems to solve those problems. But unfortunately, we tend to deal with things once we're in the crisis instead of preventing them, the cost-effective thing. And so we did get those numbers down in Ohio. The Lancet has showed it. JAMA has run an article on it. But again, it wasn't anything I could do. I could only point danger here, danger here. It's the solving that went on in every single business to do new things no one had ever done. And there's tremendous ingenuity that we need to capture in the stories of this to rewrite this playbook for the future. And quite honestly, folks, that has not happened. I have never personally been asked to testify. You're supposed to do a hot wash at the end of this, and I would say on both parties, at the federal level, at the state level. We have not yet done that. I think we will get there when time comes, and it's so vital we do, because there are so many lessons, not just for this crisis, but for every crisis and everything we endure. So much ingenuity that needs captured. The only person who has testified talked about magnetized spoons, and I think that doctor just lost her license. But they've never asked me, which I think is a very interesting statement. So let me quickly tell you 3 more things. I want to talk about those concepts of leadership. I'd love to say that I picked my pronouns that deliberately, but I did not. In fact, I didn't sleep a lot. I had little note cards I would carry around. Things and serendipities would happen. I would jot them down. I was never scripted. That never, for those of you in politics, it never happens. And is a real testament to the governor and his team that they allowed me to be who I was. I was supposed to attend a training, a spin training put on by the CDC in the fall of 19. And right before the weekend I was supposed to fly out, tripped over my dog gate, my old dog Winnie, Bob. I tripped over a dog gate. He has all these illnesses. Fractured my pelvis, was on a walker, and couldn't go. And it was, in a weird way, now looking back, just another serendipity that was probably a blessing, because I didn't know any other way than to just talk to folks as a doctor would talk to you, and I have to tell you you have cancer or some other thing. And I can't always even fix the thing you have, but I can be with you and go on that journey with you. So even my kids would say that was just mom. So I was very blessed to be able to communicate a little differently. And a Kenyon professor who studied weeks and weeks of those press conferences, and this is being studied now around the country, even by the Academy of Sciences, we created something called a ritualized holding space. Because how rare is it in this world we live in, as polarized and fractured in information as it is, that we all show up in one place at one time like we did. So at the beginning of the pandemic, we were together with the media. They were sitting in the room. They were going through it too. They had parents in nursing homes, and they had kids that no longer had a daycare open because everyone was sick at the daycare. Pretty soon, we had to be sequestered. The governor was at risk because he has asthma. And obviously, we were soon hidden because of the violence that you saw. But the real amazing thing was, by the end, there was one camera lens. And if you don't do media, it's so strange because it is just a camera. It's blank. There's nothing there. But on the other side of it was all of us. It really was. You could feel it. I mean, it was a real feeling to be doing, a real honor to be standing there talking. And I've since learned that these press conferences were in countries that did not get good health information were watching it. Whole businesses who are publicly traded in the stock market in 48 states ran their businesses based on the information we gave as we knew it. They were able to solve problems differently. So that was a very special space and a really special thing to be a part of it. So I told the truth as we knew it. I was craving it. I think we're all craving leaders who just kind of put the hard cards on the table for us. We can take it, and it actually allows us to be participants in solving problems. Vulnerability, and I'm going to talk for a second about the bad things. It's real. From early on, I was assigned executive protection in March. I thought is because they wanted me to work because I had no time off. So I'd work in the back of the car. So they kind of downplayed it a little. Eventually, we had State Highway Patrol 24/7 in our driveway. I live in a very normal house in a very normal neighborhood, so this is not, ordinary for my life or my neighbors' lives. It began, we knew it would. In 1918, there were anti-mask societies. This is, you're upending people's lives. And there's nothing, quite honestly, my usual thing when people have, they're protesting is to go talk to them and hear what is happening in your salon. What are you dealing with? How can we solve it? Because behind the scenes, we had rooms full of people, every decision churning away on trying to solve problems from every industry. But when there's a gun, a semi-automatic gun, you can no longer walk out your house and talk to that person even, which is again, such a travesty of that. So it was real. In the end, the same folks who were after, we saw what happened with Gretchen Whitmer, the governor in Michigan, same for the governor and same for me. The January 6th folks that we eventually saw, they were part of this. So they knew that. They knew that on the dark web. They had a safe house. And it does affect your family. Right now it was running, some people heard on the way in on WOSU, I did a talk with Chief Justice Maureen O'Connor on the perils of public service in this day and age. And this is at every level. Libraries right now are under assault. I mean, everything is this way, which is very much against the principles we're going to end on and that this room is about. And that is real. I have kids who are in California who are stalked. I have colleagues who had to send their kids out of state to do their jobs. There was a very concerted attack on my position everywhere around the country. We lost over 400 people in that process. My husband's a school teacher, was elementary school teacher outside with kids when someone came up to deliver a bloody package, and they had to shut the school. So these things are real. But I need you to know that the love was so much greater than the hate. So much greater in the state. We have mailrooms that are bigger than this room. The governor, two separate mailrooms. You could not walk through those mailrooms for the things Ohioans were making and sending. It was popping up all over the state. You see the memes and things that were happening. People try to make sense out of what was happening through art. I said something like 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon spread and some giant bacon statue went up in a corporate park in Cincinnati. There was a woman named Bonnie Bowen. She did watercolors on a Facebook group. Day one of the pandemic, day 2, she's in her 90s, day 300 and something. She got COVID. Hundreds of thousands of prayer messages sent to her from all over the country. She got through it. So you can't tell me this purpose and meaning and what she was doing helped her do something in a hard time, and it came back to her 1,000-fold. I said something about Colbert Show that Michael Stipe had been on, the lead singer from R.E.M. He had sung a song that was so beautiful. And I would say things like this on the press conference, no time for love like now. It's really worth listening to. I said that, next thing I knew, he called up. And he wanted to talk about how do we spread kindness, how do we do things to help people get through this time. And that went on and on and on. There were so many stories of heroism. I fully believe we need a StoryCorps type thing done, both in the state and around this country. Everywhere I go, the stories of what people have done and endured. We must capture this history. So finally, I want to talk about empowerment. It was intentional to me. The thought I had about that 9/11 feeling was everyone wants to do something to help. So asking people each press conference to do something was something I thought a lot about. We had been very fortunate. I'd hired a communications director 4 days before the pandemic hit. We had been searching for that position. Turned out that her brother had gone to my med school. He's from Ohio. His name is Vajiv Venkaya. He actually worked for George W. Bush and helped write the pandemic playbook. What are the chances? The second we told the truth, people like that brought all the best scientists who had gone underground. That's been written about in Michael Lewis's book, The Premonition, all true. There's something called Red Dawn, because scientists were being attacked from January on when they spoke up. They all started coming to us. The second we told the truth, people from all over the world came with the best information. Governors helped other governors behind the scenes. They reached across the aisle. It all fell away. But we needed to give people things they could do and to act. Make no mistake, we are at an inflection point in this country. Very quietly at the same time in 2020, the Academy of Arts and Sciences published something called Our Common Purpose. It was a nonpartisan think tank look at our democracy. And it has been thought that we might be facing the fourth founding of our democracy. We've had this unrest before. We've had these changes and turbulence. They're not new, and I'm looking around this room, many people have lived through a thing or two. But from the beginning of our country, Reconstruction, the Civil Rights era, to the time we're living in now, what has really become clear to me is that we have to co-create the world we want to live in generation and generation again. We don't get to rest. And that's just a truth. What I saw of the kindness and the ways people reached out to one another, kindness is not weakness. Niceness, fake, I pat you on the back, I go stab you behind the fake stuff, not good. Kindness is an age-old, enduring principle in every world religion, in every society, scientifically studied and proven. Loving kindness, the hardest kindness we all face in here. That's the biggest trick. What we do out into the world, it saves us, it changes our blood pressure. I can tell you so many things. Science is pouring out now, coming out of the pandemic. Being out in nature, having states of awe and wonder, gratitude. The Surgeon General has just put out an advisory equal to C. Everett Koop's smoking advisory in the 80s, saying that isolation and loneliness is the epidemic that underlies everything else we're seeing. The epidemics, not only of heart disease and stroke, great data showing that being alone and lonely, because we're social creatures, we're wired for connection, is like smoking 15 cigarettes a day or having 6 drinks a day. It affects our anxiety, it affects our depression. We are in a world where we are craving connection. Solitude we all love. I love to be alone. That's something I choose to refresh and reboot. But that sense of loss of connection in these very, very polarized times is really something, an epidemic we're all facing. So the way forward, how do we heal? How do we have hope? Because there are days I don't. I'm just being honest with you. There are days I crawl in bed and I'm like, that's it. I might need a new state. I don't know what there are days that are hard. You get up the next day and you try again. In ways small and big, there are moments we all face. I did my work, the same work I keep doing, the same work I wasn't on TV doing it before. I'm not on TV now, but in the things we see that we can't unsee. And we all face them in little ways, like your poem, or in the big ways where we just can't look the other way. These moments will capture us, and we're probably getting a little nudge that it might be time to act. We will emerge from this. We will eventually, like 9/11, have to mourn. We will memorialize what we've been through as a country when we finally understand the extent of it, how many people died of things not COVID because ambulances had to keep riding around and couldn't get in the ER. We will start to understand that eventually, and then we'll have to make meaning out of all we've endured. But I have great, great hope that more and more of us are feeling a tug toward the principles, the very kinds of things like the integrity, the moments where we have to speak and stand up and not look the other way. And that time is now. So thank you. I'd love to take any questions, and I will definitely stay after.
Doctor, you minimize what you did for us. I've been in an industry my whole life where my competitors talk about being solution providers. I would suggest to you that my feeling has always been solving the problem is way easier than discovering the problem. And what you did was discover the problems for everybody to about to solve. I can't thank you enough for that.
Aw, thank you. And there were problems you could not have ever imagined. And that's how intertwined and interdependent all our industries are, everything is. In the world of our future, Bess was someone knew her growing up. These amazing young people coming of age right now are thinking differently. They've gone through a lot of hard things, and we worry about this generation. I think they could be the greatest generation on earth. And as you think about Rotary and how you keep reinventing yourselves, they see things differently. They're ready to have hard conversations. They have a lot of compassion. They like to convene. They like to solve things. And that's what you need. You need people who are going to see that problem and then not be afraid, like Angela Merkel, to bring every industry to the table. Angela Merkel brought theologians and medical historians and like military and everyone to solve this. It wasn't a virus and an epidemiology problem. It was so much bigger than that. That would be in the playbook. We'd solve problems differently. Yes.
You mentioned Angela Merkel, and that takes me to Germany. I looked at some of the numbers, and they did so much better than the U.S. Is there any short statement of what they did? I tried to look at it, and I can't figure it out.
You know, New Zealand also has gained a lot of attention, Jacinda Ardern. I found that leaders who and the governor and I went for this long walk. He has this cross-country field next to his house, and we just walked in circles. And I was like, sir, first of all, you need a kitchen cabinet that's your own, because he was getting, people don't realize perhaps the reason I stepped down was because I couldn't sign an order coming from the legislature that I knew would cause me to violate the Hippocratic Oath. Wasn't the protesting, hardly could see that in the height of things. But there are things that I can't do ethically. And so those were the kinds of pressures that were mounting in this country, even on the best people who were trying to lead. They were profound. And in those countries, she faced it too. But I think who she brought around the table, which is always where I begin any problem solving, who's not here, who needs to be here, cross systems. I think that is a big clue. If we could pause and study this, we would have answers. Who they typically bring are typical infectious disease people, and this was not by any means just an infectious disease problem. So leaders who recognize that.